Having a chronic illness like type 1 diabetes can come with a lot of internalization, worrying about burdening others, having to slow them down, or being a nuisance. Oh, Justin needs to take a break again. Drama queen. There's a sense of needing to explain your actions, educate about the diabetes tech you're wearing, or get defensive about the food you eat. There's a lot of stigma, and it can feel like coming out over and over again. Today, we're getting into the social and mental toll that diabetes takes through the eyes of myself and a friend who was there since day one of my diagnosis. Welcome to the show. I'm Justin. I have type 1 diabetes, and on here I talk all things diabetes tech, news, and management. I come off as a happy and confident guy. I am. But often, diabetes can leave me frustrated or inside my head, even when I'm surrounded by friends. Joining me today is a T1D friend, Jake Giles. He has had type 1 since he was 16 years old. Jake and I met on a dating app a few years ago, and he was one of the first people I reached out to when I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes 3 years ago. He wrote an incredible piece for Beyond Type 1 that put into words many of the feelings that I internalized during difficult highs and lows. I've linked that piece in the show notes. It is a must read. One of his quotes that stuck out to me was this: "But even my closest friends don't understand the shame and embarrassment I experience when diabetes interrupts my life." Jake and I had a moving conversation about our relationship with diabetes, our acceptance of being gay and having type 1, how we handle both social and dating situations, and the highs and lows that interrupt these meaningful moments. Jake had me in tears not only reading his piece, but throughout this conversation, so please excuse some of the moments when I'm choking up, but it struck a chord with me. Keep in mind that anything you hear on this podcast or any of my pages is not medical advice and is for educational purposes only. Always consult with a physician before making changes to your healthcare. Oh, and very important, if you or anyone you know have been impacted by the fires in LA and are in need of supplies, there is a link in the show notes that you can fill out with the supplies that you need. I've teamed up with other volunteers in LA. They are procuring a ton of supplies and giving them to families that lost everything. We want the last thing for you to have to worry about: diabetes. You're probably not listening to this, so if you know someone who has been impacted, please fill out this form for them and we'll get the supplies to them. All right, now for the show. Jake, welcome to the show. This is so exciting because you've been on my diabetes journey since kind of like day one.
I'm an early adopter. I'm just going to say it. I'm an early diabetic adopter. Yeah, it's great to be here.
You and we met on an app, a dating app, years ago, right? And the funny thing is we never actually met. And that was before I was diagnosed with diabetes. And I didn't even know you had diabetes. And then it wasn't until maybe 6 months later that I got my diagnosis. And you must have seen on social that I was talking about it, and you reached out, and you were really like a guiding force at that early diagnosis. You and a few other friends that I knew had type 1. And, in order to not bombard one friend, I would kind of go to each person and ask a few different questions. And I don't know, thank you so much for kind of being there in the early days. You really helped me out. I was going through the chat logs.
Oh my God, I'm curious what we talked about.
Yeah, I told you I wasn't sure if I had type 1 or type 2. You were like, I assume type 1.
That's right.
Just based off the way you look. And you told me about some of the tech you were using and endocrinologists you recommended. And one thing you said to me that stood out was you said that you're going to get through this. The journey you're on has been a journey so many other people have been on. And he's like, I know that sounds cheesy, but you aren't special here, which is like a good thing,
Totally.
So
yeah, hopefully that made you feel like, all right, this is new, this is scary, but so many people have done this before. And, I like you talk about on your podcast, this is a good time to be a type 1 diabetic because of how many options there are for technology and treatment, but also like the community aspect, the fact that you and I can have this conversation and other conversations with other people who are diabetic. It does make that journey feel less lonely for sure, and also feels like, all right, this isn't this this singular burden, like it feels like every day when I'm managing this myself, I know other people understand it and are doing the same thing. And that feels good sometimes.
Yeah, and you told me that you had also spoken to other people at the beginning of their diagnosis and kind of helped guide them through. Why was it important to you to help them out or just help me out? Use your time to kind of just, you were there for me. Like whenever I had a question, you answered it.
Hey, it was honestly my pleasure. And I think a lot of that motivation comes from being diagnosed and not having anybody in my life who understood it. I remember I was diagnosed at 16, and the only thing I knew about type 1 diabetes was this kid in my class had it in third grade. And sometimes he would have to have a spoonful of maple syrup because his blood sugar started feeling low. And, that was in the 90s. And when I was first diagnosed in 2005, 2006, there it was just the beginning of a lot of technology. And I grew up in a really small town, and there was no endocrinologist. I had to see my primary care family provider after I was diagnosed, and he didn't know what to prescribe me. He was just like, well, I know you need insulin, but just try eating like 40 carbs a day for the next 2 weeks, and then you can like see an endocrinologist. Like all of it was so new. And so for 2 weeks, my mom and I really struggled to understand what this was. Like giving me strawberries with Splenda, just scrambled eggs for breakfast. It was such a radical change from how I was eating. And again, just felt so alone. So as I've gotten older, as I've met people throughout my life, just knowing how nice it would have been to just be able to like send a quick message and say, hey, what do you do in this situation? That would have made me feel so much more confident in my ability to manage something that I was not prepared for.
You wrote a piece for Beyond Type 1, and its title is Coming Out Twice, Being a Gay Diabetic. That title really stood out to me because it does feel like I'm constantly coming out because there's this piece of me that needs to sometimes be explained. Why am I looking at my phone? Why am I dizzy and need to slow down? And it feels important to tell people and what's going on because you don't want to pass out and be alone. It feels very important, more so than coming out about being gay in that sense. Why did you decide to call the article that?
The reason I called it coming out twice is because I was starting to feel the same feelings I felt when I came out as gay. So I came out as gay in seventh grade. I was very young, and I didn't come out all at once. It was a slow progression of like my best friend and then my sister and then like a small group of friends. And so by the time I became diabetic, I was out to most people in my life. And I realized that as I entered the world as an adult, explaining to people why I had diabetes felt very similar to how it felt explaining that to people that I'm gay, except more so sometimes. It felt like I had to do way more educating than when you just tell someone you're gay. And in my small town, there weren't that many gay people at all. So there was some level of education, but like type 1 diabetes
Where'd you
is
grow
this
up?
whole other realm. I grew up in Kewanee, Illinois. It's a central
Okay.
Illinois town about 3 hours southwest of here. And yeah, 13,000 people, I think, but like my high school was 150 kids. I graduated with 50 kids in my senior class. Like it was very intimate. Everybody knew everybody's business. And I, yeah, I think that experience in some ways was easier than coming out as a diabetic in some ways. And I'm like I said in that article, I'm very fortunate in my coming out experience that most of my family and friends were accepting and supportive, but that's not the case for everybody. And with diabetes, it's similar. Like everyone's trying to support you and understand you, but no one can fully understand what you're going through or dealing with
Yeah.
unless you're dealing with it yourself.
So you were diagnosed with type 1, what, 4 years after you came out? Did coming out
Yeah.
prepare you for that in the sense like of sharing that with others, being open about it?
Yes. Absolutely. I think again because you're being vulnerable about something. You're being vulnerable about your sexuality, your preferences, who you are, but then you're also being vulnerable about this medical issue that you are dealing with on a daily basis. And that requires a level of letting your guard down and being honest about something with people that are strangers. And I think a lot of queer people feel that, where you have to come out as queer in many ways when you're LGBTQ, whether it's correcting someone on your pronouns, or saying like, hey, you misgendered me. Those types of things are very similar to when you have to explain to someone, oh, I'm diabetic. I have to take insulin before I do this, or I have to factor in this physical activity. Like, those require an extra level of explanation and understanding from the people around you. So those feelings overlap for me a lot. I don't know about you.
Oh, absolutely. Of the two, was one harder to come to terms with?
Oof. Wow, deep. I I think that the diabetes, because there's less there's less diabetic people, type 1 diabetic people, than
Yeah.
LGBTQ people in the country. And I think with being LGBTQ, like, that is, there's just a bigger community of people, and I mean, the issue is in the nation's political the global political spotlight. So there's less education, and there's more of a baseline understanding when you're interacting with someone about that topic, versus type 1 diabetes. Speaking of Beyond Type 1, they just posted what's in and out of 2025, and one of the things that was out is people saying, oh, do you have the bad kind of diabetes? And, like, that's such a
I get
funny
that a lot.
question, because, like,
Yeah. They both suck. They all suck.
yeah, there, exactly. We're not. It's not a contest, but I know what they mean because I've been asked it enough. They want to know, oh, do you have the one that you can't cure? I'm like, yeah, I do have that, and it does suck. But that there, I would say, and, back to your original question, that journey of acceptance of this condition that I have no choice but to manage, that has been harder to come to terms with and deal with on a daily basis than my sexuality, which is kind of not necessarily an afterthought. It's because it's who I am. But you're constantly having to manage your diabetes. You're not constantly having to talk about being gay.
Yeah, I think that for me, perhaps in the beginning of both, the gay thing was harder for me, right? I didn't
Sure.
have as much exposure to gay people as people do today. Will and Grace saved my life. Like, that was luckily on television. I saw it and it made me feel like I wasn't alone, and finally gave me courage to come out. But it was very difficult at first, and I felt like I was hiding who I was. I never really came out of my shell. Every time my mom and my aunt would say, the girls are going to love you, it was like a dagger through my heart. Once coming out, once opening up, going to college, making friends, really flourishing, now it's not it's never an issue for me. With type 1
Yeah.
diabetes, it was really difficult at the beginning, but that's mostly because I wasn't very educated in it. But something interesting about it is that while sometimes you can feel like you've got it down, you never have it down. There's always going to be a
Right.
curveball. And even on this trip, I can remember one moment after some drinks where I was kind of going low, and you know how you get anxious and paranoid a little bit. And I just had this thought of like, I wish I didn't have diabetes. And I'm
Yeah.
thankful that I don't say that about being gay.
Totally, totally. Did you have anyone in your life, or what did you know about type 1 diabetes before you got it, or before you even thought you had it?
So I had at least 5 people in my life who had type 1 that I knew of when I was diagnosed. But even knowing those 5 people, that initial moment when I'm like, oh, I need to take insulin my entire life, the rush of like, how do I go camping and road trips and all of this stuff, fills in, comes in, and you're like, I can't live a normal life. And then you're, after maybe a day, you're like, oh, wait, I know people who are living good lives. And you were one of those people. But there was a colleague, there was a best friend from college, and maybe a couple other people, one other guy I dated. But most of these people never explained to me how their diabetes worked. It just wasn't part of
Yeah.
the conversation. My best friend, Jenna, who's come on the show, and we talk about it all the time now, it's been this like huge part of our relationship, which is awesome. this whole other level that we understand each other on. But she never told me about it. Like now I can think back to when we lived together in college and be like, oh, that's why she needed to run into 7-Eleven to get sweets. But I'm so thankful for having a few people, including you, to reach out to in that early period to tell me, no, it's going to be okay. And I think thanks to coming out and learning that it will be okay, and having had cancer when I was 21 and surviving, and knowing that if I could do that, and so many other people have type 1 and they're living great lives, like I'll be fine.
Yeah, I love that. It kind of goes back to the fact that when I was diagnosed, this was pre social media. This was pre like the internet as a global community. There was obviously
Yeah.
resources about diabetics. There was forums. There was mailing lists, and there and Yahoo groups. Like there were all these like smaller digital communities, but the visibility of it and just that feeling that there's so many people dealing with this and I'm constantly seeing their struggle alongside my struggle, or them thriving alongside me thriving. There was just none of that. So it really did, it felt like such a, I think that's why like it's not so surprising to me even that your friend didn't educate you, because it becomes this thing that you have to just deal with on your own, because you can't explain it accurately to anybody. So therefore you just really try your best to do it without involving anybody else.
My job is having diabetes now, and I talk about it all the time. But when I'm not working, I don't want it to be who I am. It's not who I don't identify as a type 1 diabetic. How much of your identity is your diabetes? Is it part of your identity? It's not your job like it is mine. I'm just curious to kind of
Right.
hear how you include that into your day to day around people.
I think it's a great question, and I really believe it's a journey as well, because I was really similar, and sometimes I still resist the label of like I'm a type 1 diabetic. I don't think I would ever claim to be, I don't make diabetes the central focus of my life. I am not a diabetic activist. Have very strong opinions about the way diabetes is managed in this country alongside of our healthcare system, sure. But I was really resistant to making it part of my identity. And I think some of that's pride and just being like, I'm just like everybody else. I can manage this. I have it all together. And I think as I've gotten older and as I've struggled with it more, and as I've had more of those moments like you mentioned where you're just like, damn, I really wish I wasn't diabetic right now, I have had more of a inclination to say, okay, this is part of me. And I mean, just the fact that I'm talking about it with you right now is me being visible about it, you being visible about this. And I know these kind of conversations help people. I have a friend who is a registered nurse, and he sees a lot of diabetic patients, a lot of younger patients. And he's talked about the ways that he's seen their struggle change because of the visibility aspect of it, because they know other gay diabetics, because they see technology in a Pixar movie. Like those things didn't exist when I was first diagnosed. So I wouldn't say I was afraid to make it part of my identity. I just didn't know how to make it part of my identity.
This episode is sponsored by Omnipod. You guys know that staying connected to the tech world is important to me, but what's also important to me is my insulin pump. Omnipod 5 is tubeless and waterproof, which means I never have to disconnect from automated insulin delivery, even when I take a shower, go swimming, or go to the gym. Staying connected to my insulin pump means I'm spending more time in automated mode, which ultimately helps me spend more time in range. See if you're eligible for a 30-day trial by visiting omnipod.com/diabetic. On there, you'll see full safety and risk information and trial terms. Again, that's omnipod.com/diabetic. And the same way that you say that this exposure to people on social media and knowing that there's others out there to make it feel more normalized, I think the same thing can be said about the piece that you put out. And there was a line in it. I cried a few times reading it. It really struck me, because I think that you put into words a lot of thoughts I have that I don't talk about. And one of the things you said was, quote, acknowledging my status as a person with diabetes means acknowledging a disability. I can tell just by talking to you that you're a strong-willed person, and so am I. And those moments when we're not okay because of our diabetes, like there's this part of not wanting to burden people and feel weak. And I know I'm not weak. I know we're not weak, but we are in this moment, and it's out of our hands. And it comes up a lot. It's come up on my vacation where I went with a friend to go run an errand, and we were going to the gym after. He's like, oh, why don't we just run there? And I was like, wait, you want to run there? Well, that means I needed to put on a temporary override for sports mode an hour ago. And you know what I did? I didn't say a word, and I ran. And you know what happened 30 minutes later? I went low. And I knew that would happen. And I'm angry at myself for not being open about it, but I don't want to freaking have to feel weak. And also, not just that, I don't want to have to continue, especially when you're on vacation with someone for 2 weeks, constantly be the person that's asking people to wait 10 minutes for a low to come back up, to slow down our pace for the reservations we're going to be late to because I have insulin on board. All of that. These are things that are so internalized. And reading that in your piece just really freaking struck me. I mean, this not wanting to burden people, right? That's a thing.
That is a thing. It really is. And it just like here, I have chills because like all the things you're talking about are the things we don't talk about to anybody else. Like we let life move us along rather than us making life stop for us. And it's really hard sometimes to, even if someone says like, oh my God, it's fine, you're not being a burden, or no, of course, like it's so hard to just accept that at face value and have that voice say like, no, they're really annoyed with you right now. It doesn't matter what you're saying. And I think I'm lucky to have a lot of people in my life who are supportive and who have watched me struggle with it. So I think that builds a lot of understanding and empathy when you are going through things. But and I think that's a great reason why group vacations, group brunches, like any group situation where I feel like I'm gonna have to be like, oh, excuse me, it just puts me on edge. And I think both things can be true, that we shouldn't have to feel that way, and also it sucks to feel that way, and it's natural to feel that way.
Yeah, this friend I was with is such an understanding and supportive person. This whole trip, he's actually gotten a real view into my life. I was talking to him about it. I was like, did you ever realize like all these things that come up? He's like, no, we go out to dinner and then go home. Like this is the first time every day we're together. He hears beeps and I, but very supportive. And my advice to everyone listening is don't do what I did. Stick up for yourself. Don't just assume, say it's going to be okay. It's not worth the low. Yeah. Lows are just the worst, and it ruined my workout. I wound up not working. I wound up doing the opposite of working out. I had glucose, which just was, is just going to go into my fat. Like, I was so upset at myself. I wanted to do this healthy thing for myself, and I wound up gaining weight. Another moment that I really wanted to ask you about and kind of tell us as much or as little as you want, but you mentioned that you went to a Robin concert and something happened there. Can you kind of take us into that?
Yeah, great segue from the situation you're talking about. It's very similar. I was in Detroit for Pride, and Robin happened to be playing a show during Pride weekend. Like, how could we not go? So we spent the day at the Pride Fest, and then we had planned to migrate to the concert. And on paper, that seems amazing. Like, you're day drinking with your friends outside at a queer event in a big city, and then you're going to go see like one of your favorite pop stars at night. Amazing. So I was so pumped, but I I I was trying to hang. I was trying to keep up. I mean, I don't do well with drinking anyway. Add the diabetes onto that, and it's never a fun situation for me. And I had been drinking all day. I did not have a CGM at this point. I was checking everything by finger stick. I had a Novolog pen. That's how I was managing everything. And then when we got to the show, I could start to feel myself go low. I knew it was coming, and I ran to the bar and I was like, "Can I just get like a Red Bull, regular?" And I chugged it, and then literally, I'm not even kidding. Like as Robin was starting to go on stage, like as the music was playing, I was like, I don't feel good. And I just like looked around, and the next thing I know, like I was being taken up the stairs by paramedics. I'd passed out and I bit my tongue on the way down. So I was like bleeding out my mouth. And I just, I just remember being like, what the hell just happened? And I finally came to, and they started to explain like, hey, your blood sugar was really low. You passed out. And I remember two of my friends left the concert to come see me in the hospital. We were with a big group, and so like I didn't expect everybody to come into my hospital room. But I just remember one of my first, like the first things I said was I was like, I'm so sorry, you guys. I just kept apologizing to my friends, just like I'm so sorry that I am the reason you were missing this thing we've been looking forward to for months. And they of course they were supportive, like it's okay, and no, it's not your fault, and these things happen, but you can't just wipe away that guilt. It just feels like you're robbing someone of an experience that you wanted to have too. Like I was mad for myself. The whole thing was rough, but that was the first time I had like a complication with my diabetes where I passed out from it, and it's the only time since then, I should say. So we have to be the ones to speak up for ourselves in those situations.
Do you think there's something you could have done differently that day? Like that you weren't looking out for yourself in that moment because you wanted to just do the thing?
Yeah, I absolutely should have slowed down, just like check my blood sugar, see what it was at, and then make a more informed decision. But I didn't. We were just moving so fast,
Yeah.
like throughout the
Yeah.
entire day, from fest to bar. It was just, it was too much activity, and like I think we all want that escape too, and like we want that escape as queer people at Pride, where we're just like, let's be proud and let's be with our friends and let's be gay. It's great. And then we also, as diabetics, like I don't want to think about diabetes right now. I just want to focus on this time with my friends or this show.
Yeah, I think the number one thing I miss from the before times, which, I got a good 30 years of life without diabetes.
Yeah.
I miss the freedom of life, of just doing whatever I want and not worrying about repercussions, you know, from a low glucose or a high glucose. And the spontaneity, the running around, the drinking, the eating, the group dinners, the binge drinking, the dancing, things that everyone should do and have fun and enjoy. It's just so much harder, to a point where I don't drink as much as I used to. I passed out when I was in in Fire Island a couple of years ago, and thank goodness I was able to yell out a friend's name before I hit the ground, and got a glass of orange juice in my system, just before I did. But it was the scariest moment of my life, and I lived with that for months. A form of PTSD from that moment, being afraid to give myself insulin, the amount that I
Oh
needed
yeah.
to cover meals. This is such a crazy disease because of the drug we need to take, insulin, which is like
Right.
our medicine and our poison. Too much,
Yep.
not good. Too little, not good. Like, I'm not a scientist. We do the best we can. We kind of are scientists to a degree now. But it really is like a mind fuck.
Yes. That's
We're
really
living great lives. We
yeah.
are living great lives.
Totally. It's like if I had the choice of never going to a concert again or going to it and knowing I had to take care of my diabetes because of it, of course I'm going to choose the concert. But the
Yeah.
PTSD you mentioned is very real. That I would say like my number one struggle as a diabetic in terms of getting my numbers where they need to be is I don't give myself enough insulin. And it's because of that moment. It's because of passing out at that Robin concert and feeling like I was going to die and knowing that if I would have been in a different situation or if I would have had no one around me, that I would have died. And I think I just take that with me now and especially when I'm about to eat a big meal and and we've talked about my technology. I'm using the Omnipod Dash with Loop and Dexcom G7. And even now, when I get the recommendation, if it's going to put my insulin on board over 8 units, I'm like, oh my God, that just seems too
It's
much,
scary.
even though that's what I
It
need to
seems too
have.
much.
Right.
I had
Yeah.
10 the other day. I was like, what is going on? This doesn't feel okay.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so you're wearing Dexcom, Omnipod, you're using DIY loop, perhaps inspired by me. We'll get into that later. But there was a moment you called out in the article that you stopped wearing your CGM and you switched to a glucometer for a while. Why did you do that?
I don't. I think a lot of it was shame. I think that was probably the bulk of it. I felt that I was in this phase of my life where I was going out a lot. I was trying to date. I was going to the beach more. I was doing all these things to just really put myself out there more. And I just started to realize, like, as I was going out more and putting myself out more, that also meant I was getting more questions from people naturally about the thing on my arm. And I was wearing, for a while, I had the original Omnipod and the Dexcom, oh my God, G4 at that point. I don't even remember what it was. And I just hated having the two things on me because not only am I explaining one thing, I'm explaining two devices now. And so then I think two in the early stages. Oh, speaking of the devil. One second, I'm
How are we doing?
67. Also, speaking of ways you've influenced me, these
Yes.
things are
Oh, they're so good.
incredible.
The pure organic leather snacks, like fruit leather snacks.
Love. I'm obsessed.
Oh my God,
I
I
will
love that you
never
got.
go back.
Wow, I guess you would call me an influencer.
Mm-hmm.
I did a
Mm-hmm.
video about like the Costco snacks that I like. That was one of them, and then there are a few other ones, including like the apple sauces that they have.
I got those
They're
too.
so good because you feel healthier doing it. I don't know if the apple sauces are as fast as the pure organics, but they still do the trick. If you're not like really diving, then they'll do what you need, and you can feel a little better about it. Links in the show notes. I'll put
These, like,
links to these products in the show notes.
yes, please. Like, these
Click the
taste so
link.
good, and
Yeah.
they're so much better than the glucose tablets. Like, it's like eating powder with those. These are
Yeah.
delicious.
With you having CGM readings on your phone or your wrist, having that data available at all times, how have you kind of found that balance? Or what was kind of the problem you found? And then kind of how do you solve it?
I was way overlooking at my Dexcom data when I first started getting on it, and it did the opposite of making me try to take action and be empowered. It made me feel more anxious and like I wasn't doing a good job, and those feelings were really hard to sit with because you think everything's going to be better once you have this technology that helps you thrive, but it turns out that it creates this whole other suite of problems and perceptions of yourself as a diabetic. So I would say over time, I think the two things that have really helped are the first is just being the technology's gotten better. And rather than having to like unlock my phone and go into an app, I like being able to just look at it, take a quick glance at the screen and see the Dexcom widget now and just know like, okay, I don't have to like look at the trends. I can just know what I'm at right now and I can adjust it later. And then the second thing is loop. Like that just knowing that there's a better, stronger algorithm that I have had more control over and more input into, it has made me feel less insecure about going into the app and checking data. I'm more confident now.
Yeah, I think for me, a big thing was, well, there were two things. One was trusting the alerts. The alerts are there to let you know when something needs to be addressed. If you don't have an alert,
Yeah.
do your thing or listen to your body. I mean, if your body's telling you something, then listen to it and address because CGMs aren't perfect.
Right.
Waiting for alerts and not looking at a graph and being like, oh, I'm trending down, I'm trending up, I need to do something. No, it will let you know. The second thing was,
Yep.
I don't wear my Apple Watch anymore. A big
I was
part
wondering
of that was I didn't want to have my CGM readings on my wrist. I was looking
Yeah,
at it too
I don't
much.
blame you at
And
all.
then not even that, I was getting texts, calls, alerts. It was just, I want to live in the moment in all aspects of the way. And I mean, my phone, I don't even get text buzzes or sounds. I have to unlock my phone and then tap the messages app to see my text. So if I haven't texted you back, that's why.
That's why.
But I'm too busy. I want to live in the moment. I want to, enjoy life. And all of these alerts from apps or access to information is just a little bit too much for me, and I found that happy boundary that I needed to make, and I'm I'm much happier because of it.
How long did you wear the watch with your readings on it?
I got an Apple Watch right around when I was diagnosed.
Wow,
So I wore it for like 2.5 years, I'd say.
that's a long
Yeah. I
time.
mean,
That's
the
a long
Apple
time.
Watch is great. Like, it does so many cool things. And one thing that I like still travel with my Apple Watch, I just leave it in my bag. My favorite thing as a content creator is I can control my camera with it. So I can see so if I set up my camera, I want to use the best cameras. So they're the ones on the back. I set up my camera and then I look at my watch and I just use it to record. That's the only thing I use my Apple Watch for right now. Okay, a bit of a tangent, but I want to kind of get into dating life a little bit, and it does kind of connect with what you were saying with like your whole wanting to take all of the tech off. Was there a moment? I know you're in a relationship now, but was there a moment when you were on the dating apps and you didn't put pictures of you wearing the tech?
Yeah. I would say most of my 20s when I was on the dating
I
apps.
still kind of do it.
Honestly, it's just like it used to be I don't want to talk about it and I don't want someone to judge me based on it, so I'm not going to include it. And then it got to the point later, I would say, where I did talk about it, where I would either like use a prompt on Hinge and say that I'm
Mm.
type 1 diabetic, or I would have a picture where you could see my tech. And in some ways, it became a conversation starter, and those led to dates. So it's like
Ooh,
that's a good thing.
yeah.
And then in other cases, like there were a few times I'd matched with fellow diabetics, and I've never dated a diabetic, but part of me wonders how that would be. Like, would it be annoying? Would it be like, oh my god, this is our lives constantly, where it was just a diabetic bubble?
There will
But
always be low
even then,
snacks.
I right. Exactly. So I don't know. I think yeah, I'm in a very comfortable, confident, supportive relationship, and my partner is amazing at helping me deal with it and just can like read me when he can tell that I'm going low, or he can tell that I don't feel good because of it. And that takes time. But I do think I didn't accurately understand what that burden was like for people until I got into my first long-term relationship. And I say burden, but I don't know. I would be really curious to hear what you think about this, but it goes back to what you said about it's a disability. You're inviting someone into your life and they have to kind of deal with you having a disability as your partner.
Absolutely. But everyone's got issues. People struggle with
Totally.
depression, major anxiety. Like, there are so many things that people have. This is our thing, and it's our quirk.
Yeah.
And it's really sometimes a sweet, no pun intended, aspect of us. It's a grounding part of us. It's a lived
Love that.
experience that has made us stronger, and it's something people respect. People respect people who take care of themselves. We're taking care of ourselves
Yes.
24/7. We're so
Yep.
aware of our body. It's crazy. So I while sometimes I do think like, do I want to put this picture on a dating app or not? It's not because I'm insecure about it or will be when I meet them. It's more like I just don't feel like this being a conversation right now. Like, let's talk about it
Right.
when, yeah, I talk about it all day at work. The last thing I want to do is be on Hinge and saying like type 1 diabetes is this and type 2 is this. Like, no, like, let's not right now, You mentioned like kind of at the top of your article that you had to there's this distinct memory of when you were 20 years old and it was the first time you had to stop having sex because of a low. That's a lot, or it can be a lot. Can
Yeah.
you kind of take us into that moment a little bit and why it was so impactful for you?
Yeah. It was just it stood out for a few reasons. I think one, the low was really bad. I don't know what I was doing that day, but I apparently had just not been taking care of things because like I crashed. And, you know, sometimes lows are like, you're in the 70s, you feel a little shaky, you can pick it back up. This felt like a 50s, 40s kind of low. And I think the reason it got that low is because in the moment, I was like, this is great. This guy's really hot. We're having a good time. I don't want to ruin it. So I'm just going to keep going and hope that my body can rebound, even though I could feel myself getting worse and worse. And finally, like, I mean, nothing was working and I was barely working. Like, I wasn't enjoying myself at that, in that moment. So I had to stop. And I just told him, like, yo, my blood sugar is really low. We need to stop. And he was like, oh yeah, cool. Like, I don't even think he knew what that meant necessarily. And so I had a Reese's in my fridge. I ate that. And then I remember, like, as we were kind of waiting for things to get back to normal, we started just talking. And I think that in that conversation, I started to tell him more about what it was like to be diabetic, explain the condition more. And I think that made us closer. That like
Yep,
really created this moment of
absolutely.
intimacy and vulnerability that made that encounter feel more intimate too. And so I'm still friends with that person. We've talked about it, but I just remember that was a very like, oh, this doesn't have to be this scary thing. And also, you're having sex to have fun. Don't make it unfun by not listening to your body.
Yeah, I always like if I meet someone on the dance floor and we start dancing, I take their hand and I put it on my CGM and I put it on my pump and I'm like, these are my devices. Don't worry about hitting them. You like, and I sometimes will slap my pod a little bit and be like, it's fine. Like, don't worry. But I kind of just like, taking them into my world that in that little moment shows a sign of openness and maybe vulnerability
Yeah.
in your case. And that's how we create connections with people. You talked about it. What did he have to say about it, years later?
He was, and he actually is the one that said, like, you telling me about your condition and like stopping sex, like, it actually made me feel closer to you, and it made me it made me appreciate your vulnerability, and it stands out as a moment of intimacy because we did end up finishing. We did end up getting back to it after everything was in a better place. So that encounter was memorable for him for that reason too, because it, you know, you don't always have sex with someone with diabetes every day. So when you do and it turns out like that, you remember it if it turns out well. That's great.
Today's episode is sponsored by T1D Exchange. You can directly make an impact on diabetes healthcare, treatments, and technology by participating in the T1D Exchange registry. It starts with a simple survey about your life with T1D, and it only takes about 15 minutes. After that, you'll have a personal portal with ongoing T1D study and survey opportunities. Plus, some of these studies even offer compensation. Signing up with the link in the show notes helps support my channel and it allows me to continue putting out free content. You can sign up at t1dexchange.org/diabetic or click that link in today's show notes. Do you ever worry about future health complications?
Yes, I do. And I think this is a podcast, to be honest, and I I don't know if it's aging or diabetes, but yeah, things don't work as great as they used to. And for men especially, it's a natural part of aging. You just end up not having the same libido, or you don't have the same erections that you're used to having. That's natural. Whether it's diabetes or not, like, we as gay men, as people who struggle with anxiety and depression, like, it's something that we should not be scared to talk about. I was literally telling a friend today that, yeah, I'm on a new medication that is known to cause libido to slow down and some erectile dysfunction. That's nothing to be ashamed of. And there are ways to help that not be the case, and that we should all be talking about them too.
Yeah. The reason I ask is because sometimes there's things I feel, specifically like tingling in my arms and legs, and I worry about, like, is that neuropathy? And
Yeah.
it goes away. I've talked to my doctors about it. They don't seem too worried about it, but I worry about it. When I see my blood sugar at 240 for 2 hours, I worry.
Yeah.
And
Same.
I do the best I can. I have great time in range, but still I'm not convinced that it's going to be okay even with the great time in range. Because I see what my levels are at sometimes. And I know ADA standards are 70%, but like, okay, like what does that mean? They say you'll live a great life. I'm like, okay. And I am a very healthy person. I eat healthy, I work out, I do whatever I can in my power to stay healthy, but there's still this side of like something that I can't control, and sometimes I don't sit around worrying, but it does. I think about it sometimes.
Yeah, it's a natural part of it.
What are your thoughts on a cure? What has been your experience with like the idea of a cure kind of since you were diagnosed? And let's start with there, kind of like, have you heard it said like, oh, there will be a cure in 5 to 10 years, like throughout time?
Yes, many times. I think we all get those notification that's like insulin or diabetic doesn't need insulin anymore after blank, or rats don't need insulin anymore after blank, and just
Good for
getting these
them.
little studies and feeling hopeful, right? And then towards the you get those 3 paragraphs of hope and everything's great, the stats look amazing, and then human trials will begin in another 10 years, or so I've been burned over the course of my lifetime, and I don't put a ton of my attention towards it. I still have hope. I still have faith in the science community that people want to find a cure. But I also know that a cure is not going to happen overnight. May not happen in my lifetime, and it may not be what I immediately gravitate towards either. I have a friend who was diabetic, and through complications, he ended up. I mean, he didn't take great care of himself, and he knows that, and he ended up having to get a transplant because of that. But he's no longer diabetic anymore, and he has to take immunosuppressant drugs because of that. But I don't know if I would want to take immunosuppressant drugs. I just don't. It's not. I don't feel one way or the other strongly right now. I would just like I would need to have all the information available to me, and I would make that decision. Oh man, still low, but I'm open to it. Like I want there to be a cure so bad, but I guess I'm one of those
Yeah.
people who's been diabetic long enough that I'm skeptical.
Well, I'm having an episode soon. Someone's coming on to talk about all of the cures that are in the works, and there was recently like this big announcement. I don't know a ton about it. I have to read more up on it, of like this groundbreaking cure that's working. So I think that because I'm in the world of seeing all of this stuff, I am seeing a lot going into it, and I do have hope for it, and do think that it could happen. And I also think there's a lot of money in a cure. Like everyone says, oh,
Yeah,
there's a lot of money in diabetes. There aren't that many people with type 1 diabetes, and there's a lot of money
exactly.
in a cure. If you're telling me that they have to get an injection or of stem cells for a year, like whatever it is, that's expensive. Health insurance companies are going to pay for it, and these people are going to make a lot
Yep,
of money. So there is money in it.
exactly.
So
That's money.
I'm not jaded
Yep.
by like the whole money in pharmaceuticals. I think that it will. I think that won't matter. When it will come, I have no idea. I don't think it's right around the corner, but I am hopeful, and I do think
Yeah.
that that we could see it. So I
Me
think
too.
the coolest thing about yours and I's relationship is how it started with me taking as much information as I could out of you to set me on this journey, and then I become an influencer, I become a journalist in the space, and then all of a sudden I have you being like, "Hey, what is this DIY loop you're using? You like it?"
Yeah.
And
Right.
yeah, and I feel like that must have been because I started that fall after I was diagnosed. So, 6 months later, you start getting intrigued by what I was doing and everything I was doing here and following along. I think it would be very cool to have a conversation with you separate from this about technology we've used over the years and how it's evolved through your time,
Yes.
but and DIY loop, and hear all about the way you've used it and what you've learned using it over time. And if you have any questions for me, and I'd also love to talk more about loop
Yeah.
too, because I know people are very interested in that. But let's give them a little bit of a tease for that conversation. How is loop going? How long have you been using it?
Oh, Loop is going great. It's been a little over 2 years now that I've been using it. Uh, yeah, I want to save some stuff for our conversation, but I think I do want to say just in this moment that going from someone who didn't know what diabetes was doing what you're doing now and educating people and having conversations, like, I think that is so important. That is extremely valuable insight for people like me who, and I think a lot of people, like we talked about earlier, you don't want to make diabetes your identity, and sometimes that manifests in not seeing what's out there. Like, I have met so many diabetics recently about, or who asked me about Loop, and like, they're terrified of it, and of course they are, because they don't have a support system from their doctors to help navigate towards this technology, and it's really intimidating for a lot of folks who are maybe not even tech savvy like you and I, especially you, where you're having to take something that's not even in the app store and put it on your phone. So I think that one of I mean, the best benefit has been the control I've gotten. Like, that is, it's so much better now. And the second is just being less afraid of new technology. So I definitely would love to talk more about that in the future. And I just think it's extremely important for us to be open about the technology we use. And that's why I like talking with you about this.
Yeah. Well, Jake, thank you so much for coming on the show. This was a very special episode for me, and I would love to have you on again, and we can dive into all things tech and DIY Loop.
Let's do it. Thanks for having me, Justin. I'll talk to you soon.
This conversation hit me, and I want to hear from you. What is your relationship to your diabetes, and how do you communicate your needs to friends and family? What are the struggles that you are currently working to overcome or have overcome? Let us know in the comments on YouTube. This podcast is every Monday on YouTube and all podcast platforms, so if you want to watch in video with images, you can watch on YouTube, and if you're on the go, you can go to any podcast platform. If you have a story to share, let me know. Reach out to me on Instagram. It's probably the easiest way. My Instagram is diabe_tech, DIABE_tech, and I'd love to have you on the show. Thank you, Jake, for coming on. I'm excited to have you on again to talk all things DIY Loop and our relationship with diabetes technology. Can't wait for that. Until then, I'm Justin, and I'll tech you later.